Hi there and welcome to another Ginger Prince production. Today we're going to look at free will, the problem of evil and heaven, and how if you combine all three you've got a couple of headaches for theists and believers in heaven and free will. So what I'm going to do first is explain the problem of evil to those who don't know the classic arguments, explain a couple of notions of what heaven is, and look a little bit at free will and show that they don't really go together. So enjoy the video and thanks for tuning in. So what is the problem of evil? Well, the problem of evil is a classic argument that's been around since Greek times that relies on the fact that most theists believe that God is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all-loving. And if he has these, or she has these three characteristics, then why is it that there is so much evil in the world? For example, you know, whether it be tsunamis, the Holocaust, whatever. Since there's so much evil in the world, one would assume God, being omniscient, would know what to do about it, but has chosen not to minimize it, is powerful enough to do something about it, but has chosen not to do so, and is caring enough to do something about it. So since there is gratuitous evil and suffering, God is either not omnipotent, not omniscient, not omnibenevolent, or not all three, or God doesn't exist. That's the classic argument in a nutshell. It's very involved, and you can get, you know, there are what are called theodicies, which are defences of why God would exist, have those three properties, and there still be evil in the world. And we're going to look at one of those defences or theodicies, which is the free will defence. And the free will defence says that evil exists in the world, or at least some of the evil exists in the world, because humans have free will. We have the choice to do whatever we want. We are totally free, and unfortunately one of the natural byproducts of free will is evil and suffering. If God was to say, right, you're allowed to choose to do what you want, but I'm literally not going to enable you to do any evil, then we would live a kind of straitjacketed life, because whatever we did, no evil could come from it. So we wouldn't really have free will. We wouldn't really have total freedom to do what we wanted. So in order to have total free will, the argument goes, you must have the ability to do evil. Then people, or theists, believers in God, will go on to say that we, as humans with free will, simply choose incorrectly, and our choices result in so much evil. So actually the amount of evil and suffering around the world is down to the fact that we're not very good at using free will. Now, there are lots of criticisms to that. You know, it doesn't explain tsunamis, it doesn't explain, you know, any kind of natural suffering, it doesn't explain animal suffering, it doesn't explain all sorts of different types of evil, but it can be one argument of many that can be used together to defend the existence of God in light of the problem of evil argument. So let's just assume that this is definitely at least one good defense of God, the classic God of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. And we're going to take it on from here. So now we're going to look at notions of heaven. Pretty much throughout the Christian world, there is a massive variety of opinions and ideas about what heaven is and what it isn't. No one really knows, because at the end of the day there's no particular evidence for it, and it's gone through quite an evolution throughout the last 2,000 years as to exactly what it entails. But generally speaking, most people believe that if there is a heaven, there is free will in heaven. That God wouldn't make the most perfect place in conception and say, actually, you can't do what you want. But heaven is also a place where most people think there is no evil. It's sublimely perfect. So in order to have free will and no evil in heaven, something funky's got to have happened. God's got to have pulled a couple of supernatural strings really to make that happen. However, if he has made it happen, and if heaven does have free will, and heaven does have a lack of evil and suffering, then it really begs the question. If there is free will and no evil in heaven, why can there not be so on earth? And indeed, why has God made the earth like it is, where there is free will and there is suffering? Now, this presents quite a few problems, and people like Richard Swinburne, very clever theologians and philosophers, Christian theologians and philosophers, will say, well, actually, it's because on earth there has to be some kind of test as to see who gets into heaven, some kind of character building assessment, and those that pass get into heaven and those that fail don't. But this to me is absolutely ridiculous, because the cost of this happening is massive. You only have to look at the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, the tsunami in 2004, 250,000 people. So the cost of this test, to see if we can pass, to see if we can get into heaven, means that there's untold amount of death, pain, suffering and evil on this earth. And that, for an all-caring God, is really something that needs explaining. Why is this test? Why does it have such horrible consequences? And why bother having it at all if the end result for at least a good proportion of people is heaven, where free will and evil can coexist? Why can that not just be earth? Why can't God have made earth and the universe a place where free will and no evil coexist happily? If he expects us to live for eternity in heaven, if we pass the test, then why not just make a universal salvation, or universal, heaven on earth for all humanity? That would be a far more loving thing to do, rather than condemn a good deal of people to pain, suffering and death. It doesn't seem to add up to me. So where does this leave us? Well, to conclude, I've come up with quite a simple logical argument, which might be open to debate. Post your comments if you've got something to say about it. But it's as follows. Premise 1. Evil exists partly as a necessary byproduct of free will. Premise 2. God, being omnibenevolent, would eradicate evil if it was not necessary. Premise 3. Heaven exists with free will. Premise 4. There is no evil in heaven. Premise 5. Free will can exist without evil. And the conclusion: either heaven, free will, or evil do not exist, or God is not omnibenevolent. And you can really choose any one of those sort of 4 conclusions from that, and it undermines any kind of classical theism, the belief that God is omnipotent, omniscient and omnibenevolent, because quite frankly, if you believe free will and heaven exists without evil, then there is serious consequences for what you believe of this world, and whether free will can exist on this world without evil. And if it can, then God simply isn't all loving. So that's that. That's the conclusion. If you've got anything you want to say about that, any comments, disagreements, agreements, post them down below, just there, and we'll get a debate going. Cheers then. Thanks for tuning in.